Hello, Yankee. Hello, Karuna. Hello, Rick. Welcome. How's audio, video, internet connection? Hello, Maria. Hello, Jay. Welcome. You all can hear me, right? How's audio, video, connection, etc.? All right, thank you, Jay. Okay, let's get started. We'll do Maha Jaya Mangala today. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Evang me sutang ekang samayang bhagava savattiyang viharati jetavane anata pendaka sarame yatako anyatara devata abhikantaya rattiya abhikantavanna kevala kappang jetavannang ubasitva yena bhagavatin upasankamitva bhagavantang abhivaditva ekamantang attasi Ekamantang tita kosa devata bhagavantang gathaya jabhasi Bahudeva munusucha mangalani achintayung akankamana sottanang bruhi mangalang uttamang Asevana cha balanang panditanyang cha sevana pujya cha pujaniyanang etang mangalang uttamang Patirupa desava socha pubbe cha katapunyata atta samma paniddi cha etang mangalam uttamang bahu sechancha sipancha vinayo cha susikkito subhasitta chaya vacha etang mangalam uttamang Mata pitta upattanang puttadarassa sangaho anakulak chakamanta etang mangalam uttamang. Danyang cha dhammacharya cha nyatikanyang cha sangaho anavajani kammani etang mangalam uttamang. Arati virati papa majjapana sacha sanyamo appamado cha dhamesu etang mangalam uttamang. Garavo cha nivato cha santutti cha katanyuta kalena dhamma savanang etang mangalam uttamang. Kanti cha sova chasata samananyang cha dassanang kalena dhamma sakkaccha etang mangalam uttamang. Tapo cha brahmacharya cha arya satchanna dassanang nibbana satchikiriya cha etang mangalam uttamang. Puttassa loka dhammehi chittang yassana kampati asokang virajang kemang etang mangalam uttamang. Eta disani katvana sabbatang aparajita sabbatta sotingachanti tang te sang mangalang uttamanti etena satchavajena uttuam heja mangalang. Alright, English. The Great Discourse on Blessings. Thus have I heard, on one occasion the Sublime One was living near Savatthi, at Jeta's grove in the park of Anathapindika. Then, in the middle of the night, a certain deity of astounding beauty, lighting up the entire Jeta's grove, approached the Sublime One. Drawing near, she paid homage to the Sublime One and stood to one side. Standing thus, the deity addressed the Sublime One in verse. Many deities and humans have pondered on blessings, desiring their well-being. Tell me the blessing supreme. To associate not with the foolish, to be with the wise, to honor the worthy ones, this is a blessing supreme. To reside in a suitable location, to have good past deeds done, to set oneself in the right direction, this is a blessing supreme. Great learning and craft, and a discipline well trained in, and whatever utterance is well spoken, this is a blessing supreme. To be well caring of mother, of father, looking after spouse and children, to engage in a harmless occupation, this is a blessing supreme. Selfless giving, living the just life, supporting our relatives, and blameless action, this is a blessing supreme. To cease and abstain from evil, complete restraint from intoxicants, to be diligent in virtuous practices, this is a blessing supreme. To be reverent and humble, content and grateful, to hear the Dhamma at the right time, this is a blessing supreme. To be patient and obedient, the seeing of recluses, to discuss the Dhamma at the right time, this is a blessing supreme. To live austerely and purely, to see the noble truths, and to realize Nibbana, this is a blessing supreme. A mind unshaken when touched by the worldly states, sorrowless, stainless, and secure, this is the blessing supreme. Those who have fulfilled all these are everywhere invincible. They find well-being everywhere. Theirs is the blessing supreme. By the power of this truth, may joyous victory be ours. Alright friends, well, it is Monday night, and that means it's time for the Festival of Dhamma with the Maggasekha community. It's time for Dhammapalooza, where we do a variety of different Dhamma-related activities. We did some chanting, and who knows what will come in the rest of this session, because it is always community guided. Sometimes people have lots of questions, and it's mostly Q&A. Sometimes nobody has any questions, and it's reading a sutta, or doing one of our sutta games, things like this. So there's a variety of different possibilities. And I see a few people. I see Visakha. Hello, Visakha. Welcome. Everybody else I said hello to. So for the next couple of minutes in the chat, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. If you have any topics you'd like me to give a talk on, you can put that in the chat. If you have any topics of discussion that you'd want the community to discuss, you can put that in the chat. Or otherwise, we'll probably just read a sutta or do sutta roulette. I did just finish a retreat this weekend, and I'm still quite tired. It usually takes me a day or day and a half to kind of recover. So I don't know if we'll go the full hour and a half today. But if we can get a good productive hour in, that would be good. The chat is quiet. Sometimes I wonder if it's something going on with YouTube, or just everybody expects everybody else to say something. I don't know. It's a good question. It's usually when I say, how's audio video, at least 2-3 people will say, oh, hey, it's all good. This time it took a while. So YouTube is impermanent. I don't think actually I have the energy or the voice to read a long sutta. So I don't know that reading a sutta will be the best for today. But we might be able to do some sutta roulette, some word roulette, to see what comes up. That's always fun. If itch arises, compelling one to scratch, what to do? Not give in, as usual. I will just go with it if it's persistent, because if it's so inconsequential, that's what makes it difficult. Yeah, and it just is inconsequential unless you're trying to get into jhanas, unless you're trying to get into deep samadhi. Then if you're scratching every itch and adjusting for every pain and all this kind of stuff, then you're not going to get anywhere. An itch is a very fruitful object of meditation, right? To investigate, to learn about it. It's funny, one of the things I recognize a lot is, especially if I'm doing something like giving a guided meditation or even giving a talk, where I can't really, because my mind is focused, automatic things will just happen. So I'll just scratch an itch and oh, I didn't really need to do that, did I? But I was too late because it just automatically happened. And by the time I paid attention to it, it was already happening. I can do that. I can deal with it much better when I'm not giving a guided meditation or, engaged in something else, when I'm just by myself. It's not so much of an issue. I can endure, because especially what I've found is that when your mind starts to calm down, it starts to pay attention to things that you normally wouldn't pay attention to. And what happens is what I call an itch storm. All of a sudden you have awareness of all these itches everywhere. And if you can stalwartly and mindfully kind of endure it and just investigate it and just be with it, you actually eventually break through it, and on the other side of that itch storm is deeper states of meditation. So being able to kind of break through that itch storm, just kind of ride it like a boat riding the oceans during a storm or something like that. You're just riding it, being with it, following your breath or whatever, and then eventually you break through to the other side. If the Buddha was born in a palace, why was he born outside under a tree? I think he was born outside under a tree. I don't know about being born in a palace. Actually, nowhere in the suttas does he... Well, I mean, I guess technically you could call it a palace, but it's not like what we think of as a palace. The 3 mansions that he had. In the Amazing Tales in the Majjhima Nikaya, the story of the Buddha being born Queen Maya going back to her family, I believe, to give birth, and the Buddha is born on the way. Dante, can you talk about the 5 aggregates Winchigig? Dhamma learner, can you clarify that? I don't know if is it just the 5 aggregates, or was there something else that was typed that was for clarity? I don't know. Soma Drum says, "Hi Bante, what are your thoughts on the controversial sutta in AN where the Buddha says the mind is luminous?" So there's a lot of traps in this. This is first of all, if you go by people who study the suttas, especially people who study the early Buddhist texts, there is no mention of this anywhere else in the suttas. It is only in this one sutta. There's no mention of this anywhere. Now, there's mention that's similar when the Buddha is talking about like states of jhana, like samadhi states. There's maybe some similarities, but like from that sutta where the luminous mind is, it always reminds me of that Yoda quote: "Luminous beings we are, not this crude matter." But there's a couple issues with this. At least a couple issues of taking it wrongly. The first is, remember, the Buddha does not find a beginning. So the logical question might be, well, then obviously there was a time where the mind was luminous before it was corrupted. But there's no answer to that, and I think that goes too far outside of the scope of the suttas. So that can be like, that can be a sticking point right there. So if it's corrupted, was it not corrupted at some point? At least, on the positive end, if it's corrupted, but we know that it can be uncorrupted. I mean, I tend to use a simile. I don't know maybe it's kind of somewhat loosely based on this, but not really. Where I talk about how, like, in terms of wisdom and insight, and delusion, our view of reality is so diluted. It's like wearing, cloudy sunglasses, or like a lighthouse where the glass is so full of gunk that only maybe little cracks of light come out. And as you clean the glass, then more light comes out until, because there are illusions in terms of light and wisdom and things like that in the suttas. So, but still, I think that the dangers come from these kind of things, right? If you just see it as not take it literally per se, but I think it's important just to be aware of the implications of something like that. And again, this is something that is only in one place ever in the suttas, and things that are in one place ever in the suttas tend to be seen as probably unlikely to have been said by the Buddha. So it's a one-off thing, and it's not very in line with all the other, everything else said in the suttas. So I basically just, it's nice and poetic, but I don't really care about it. I don't think about it. I don't use it. It's like, and if somebody says, "Oh, was there a time where there was?" Well, if there was, does it matter? No, because I'm here in this life, and it's not. It's corrupted. So now I have to work for it. So. Rick, I know you always have questions. And actually, that's actually a very good practice sometimes, especially if you think you might have asked it before. Asking the same kind of question, maybe with a different angle over and over and over again, you might not get much out of it. It might actually be better to be silent. So I think that's and don't, just because if the chat is quiet, don't feel like pressure to have to put a question. It's okay. We can always do something else. So, I mean, heck, I could always just go to bed too. Well, let's see here. Bante, what does the Buddha have to say about householders participating in politics now that we are in election season? I don't think he has to say anything about these kind of things. I think it's just like an expectation, right? Like the Buddha says, like lay people are endowed with the 5 chords of sensual pleasure. It's kind of like the Buddha is basically like, well, this is what lay people do. Lay people talk about kings and things and this and that, and it's part of lay life. Now, it shouldn't be part of monastic life. Buddha is very clear on that. But, some monks, it is part of their monastic life, but, so I don't judge in that regard. But for myself and anybody who would ever be a Maggasekha monk, we're not going to be yapping on about politics and things like this. Buddha does not want us to waste our time in this life yapping on about stuff like that. So, but for lay people, it's just normal. It's expected. It's part of life. I actually, this is actually a good topic. I do want to address this. The practice of humility. So, whenever we're like talking about things like humility and compassion and empathy and generosity and all these kind of things, you have to, as a practitioner, be very, very mindful and aware of intentions, especially intentions that might be, harder to see, a little under the surface. So we have to be very careful, because you can have, even if you don't show it outwardly, inwardly you could be like, oh, I'm such a humble person. I have so much humility. Look, it's so easy for me to be humble in front of the other monks or whatever. So you have to be very kind of careful when dealing with these kind of mind states, because you can use it, and this is why the Buddha says in Kakachupama Sutta, the simile of the saw, the Buddha says, I do not praise a monk who is easy to admonish, to be like humble, listening to criticism, etc., for the sake of alms, food, clothes, robes, etc. So it's basically like the Buddha's like saying, they have an ulterior motive. I don't praise monks like that. Right? So you have to be, honest with yours. And this actually comes from having the mind state that you do not accept lies. You will not lie. You do not accept lies that arise in your mind. Right? You don't accept justifications and lies that arise. You say, nope, that is a lie. That is not right. And as you train your mind to be that, then, even still, you might see, I want to do this good thing, but I also kind of see that there, and most of it, maybe like 60, 70% of it is actually good intentions, but there's like 30% bad intentions. And you say, okay, well, there's some, ulterior motives, but mostly it's good for good and will have good results. So I should do it. I just have to make sure that 30% doesn't take the lead at any time, right? That 30% where the ulterior motives, praise and gain, and I am such one of the humble monks. This is why people love me, and they come and they bring me food because they think I'm half an arahant because I'm so humble, and I walk very straight and perfect, and my eyes are downcast, like these kind of things. This is a danger to be wary of, to pay attention to. So when you're being humble, developing humility is that, reflecting on that you're not perfect, you don't have all the answers, reflecting on seeing if you're actually really being on it, sincere, practicing in a sincere way, even though you're not perfect. And there is that kind of not being able to not allow like instant reactions, instant escalation to arise in you, or at least not to allow that instant escalation or instant reaction to actually take some kind of a foothold. It's like, okay. And so when you're able to kind of do that and you train that, well, then people can see that there's some humility. And when you're able to kind of recognize that you've committed something, you understand, so humility is a practice and it's something to develop just like, everything else. But the more wisdom and insight you gain, the more humble you tend to be. It's just a natural kind of side effect. Because you let go of a lot of the atta attachments, the mental attachments that cause you to not be humble. The suttas talk about being a householder or leaving the household life to become a wanderer. If this is so, why do so many monastics live in a settled place in buildings such as monasteries? Well, even at the time of the Buddha, before the Buddha's parinibbana, there were already settled monasteries. This was a the idea of settled places is as ancient as the Buddha. This is a normal thing. Now, you have to also understand that, even as not even that far out of India, as Buddhist monks left places, the kind of ethos of India of, taking care of wandering sadhus and ascetics, that doesn't exist. So kind of having one place and it being close to groups of Buddhists so that the monks can be supported is makes more sense. It makes more sense for the development and growth of monks and the Dhamma in places. Because wandering is not always feasible. Soma says, Tanusaro, Ajahn Jeff says, Buddha is saying that Buddha is talking about the knowing mind, because the knowing mind knows what is corrupted in the mind and what to work on. Yeah, I don't know. anything about. I mean, that's the knowing mind and all that. That's very Thai. That's a Thai forest kind of a thing. Um, so it's not really like you're not going to see the knowing mind in the suttas or anything like that. Um, you know, it's like the one who knows and things like that. I think what that is Ajahn Jeff making sense of it for people within his own lineage and his own tradition. I think that's what that is, really. What does the Buddha say about flood damage and devastation? Sabbe sankara anicca. Sabbe sankara dukkha. Right? This is the nature of having a body, being in the samsaric state. This is the nature of things. It cannot be otherwise. Right? In the Mindfulness of Death 2 Sutta, where the Buddha says, when one wakes up, one should reflect on all the ways they may die this day. And it goes over things from everything from bugs and weather and bad food and bandits killing you and all kinds of stuff. Right? This is the nature of having a body, means that you will be subject to all of the travails of that are entailed in having a body. This is simply the nature of things. Ah, wonderful. Talking about Ogha, the Kam Ogha, as I talk about. Amongst there are these four floods. Which four? The flood of sensuality, the flood of becoming, the flood of views, and the flood of ignorance. These are the four floods. Very good. I kind of wish I had the state of mind to have actually brought that up. But I wasn't thinking in a sutta way, in that way. Yeah, good idea. That's a great thing to put up there. Where's this from? When I pushed forward, I was whirled about. When I stayed in place, I sank. And so I crossed over the flood without pushing forward, without staying in place. Is that from the suttas? That's pretty interesting. It has very Nibbana-like language. Nibbana, there is no coming, there's no going, there's no stasis. Yeah, that's pretty neat. Yeah, the nature of life, yes. If you reflected on these things, then whatever happens, just yeah, this is the nature of life. Like when COVID happened, somebody like me who knows history and everything is yeah, okay, this is just a pandemic. This happens every 100 years or whatever. But man, people lost their minds. It's because they just went along. They had what they call normalcy bias. They thought that these kind of things just don't happen or won't happen. Well, it happens. Most people don't know that pretty much at any time we could get hit by an asteroid that comes out of nowhere and kills pretty much all the humans on the planet. We keep track of a lot of them, but there's always, even the last 15 years, there's been near misses. Oh, all of a sudden there's this asteroid that's the size of the ones that killed the dinosaurs, but it didn't actually impact. But it came close. And you're like, whoa. Yeah, there's lots and lots and lots of things that can end life. It's just the way it is. All right, I'll give it the chat a minute or so to see if anything comes up, and maybe we'll play some. We'll play some Vinia roulette. I think that's what we'll do. Well, Karuna, there's always been what I call weird birds in history. That's just how it is. There's always been people who are kind of a little off with the rest of society. You know, whether it's due to something in the mind or how they're raised or whatever. It's just how it goes. How are people supposed to investigate anatta? Well, the Buddha tells us investigate, look at everything in your experience and ask, is this me? Is this mine? Is this myself? If I think it is, why do I think it is? What are the reasons why I think it is? What's the evidence? Is this me? Is this mine? Is this myself? So the idea of anatta is that you are consistently crossing off the list things that you previously thought you took for granted were self or some kind of permanent essence, part of you, but aren't. And so by the time you're a stream enter, you've gone pretty far in that. The stream enter kind of has looked at everything and seen like, I can't find a self or a permanent soul in any of these things. But there's still this feeling I am. There's still this feeling that I exist, which is a fetter that only an arahant fully destroys. So really, only an arahant fully understands and fully has broken through anatta. For the rest of us, it's just simply a matter of investigating every aspect of our experience and questioning if there's some kind of permanent essence there. How is that me? How is that mine? How is it myself? Why do I think that? What's my evidence? Is a monastic allowed to be alone with lay people? It's a good question. Instead of doing Vinaya roulette, why don't we actually go to the Vinaya rules? Now, let me just quickly try to remember exactly what number those are. Here we go. There's a couple. Yeah, all right. There's like 5 or 6 rules and a couple different groupings, but we'll start off here. Let me share screen. This one is about sleeping place, so like a bedroom. So the training rule on the same sleeping place. The first story: at one time, the Buddha was staying near Alavi in the Aggalava shrine. At that time, lay followers were coming to the monastery to listen to the teaching. When the instructions were over, the senior monks went to their own dwellings, but the newly ordained monks lay down right there in the assembly hall together with the lay followers, absent-minded, heedless, naked, muttering and snoring. The lay followers complained and criticized them. All right, so this is I'm trying to think of I don't know. There's like movies like 13th Warrior, like kind of Viking movies where you have like these halls where just like everybody just finds a spot in the hall, and so you're sleeping with 20, 30, 40 people in the hall, right? So this is something that you see that's fairly common in many cultures from ancient times. Even up to more modern times, even in the West, like families all slept on the same bed, even in the same room, in the same longhouses. So this is part of the culture. But what do they see? They see these monks unmindful, heedless, naked, muttering and snoring. The lay followers complained and criticized. How can the venerable lie down, absent-minded, heedless, naked, and muttering and snoring? The monks heard the complaints of those lay followers, and the monks of few desires complained and they criticized those monks. How can monks lie down in the same sleeping place, etc.? After rebuking these newly ordained monks in many ways, they told the Buddha, and this is always one of the best parts of every Vinaya rule. When the Buddha finds out, it's true, sir. The Buddha rebuked him. How could those useless men do this? This will affect the people's confidence. And monks, the training rule should be recited like this. If a monk lies down in the same sleeping place as a person who is not fully ordained, he commits an offense entailing confession. Now, a lot of these rules, though, that's only the first iteration. So we're going to see that we have another one. Second sub-story. After staying at Alavi for as long as he wanted, the Buddha set out wandering. Rahula, the Buddha laid down training rule that we can't lie down in the same place as a person who's not ordained. Please find another sleeping place. Since Rahula was unable to find another sleeping place, he laid down in the bathroom in the outhouse. Then after arising early in the morning, the Buddha went to the restroom where he cleared his throat. Rahula too cleared his throat. Who's there? It's me, Rahula. Why are you sitting there, Rahula? Rahula told the Buddha what happened. Soon after, the Buddha gave the teaching. Monks, I allow you to lie down in the same place as a person who isn't fully ordained for 2 or 3 nights. All right, so it went from you're not lying down, in any place with lay people at all to a couple days, a couple nights. And so the final ruling. If a monk lies down more than 2 or 3 nights in the same sleeping place as a person who's not ordained, he commits an offense entailing confession. And this gives like little definitions of every aspect. All right. So what's a sleeping place? What is a person who's not fully ordained, etc. And then it gives you if such and such, then this such and such, then it's this rule breach. So we're not going to go in detail. And then non-offenses. So there's always at the end a list of if these are in play, then there's no offense. So there's no offense if he stays together for 2 or 3 nights, for less than 2 or 3 nights. If after being together for 2 nights he leaves before dawn. if it's fully roofed but not walled, if it's fully walled but not roofed, etc., etc. So that's the first one. Now we get into more complicated, because this is the lying down with a woman. Second rule on the same sleeping place. At one time, when the Buddha was staying at Savatthi in Anathapindika's monastery, Venerable Anuruddha was walking through the coastal country on his way to Savatthi. When one evening he arrived at a certain village, just then a woman in the village had prepared her guest house. Anuruddha went to that woman and said, "If it's not inconvenient for you, I'd like you to stay in your guest house for one night." "Please say, Venerable." Other travelers also went to that woman and said, "Madam, if it's not trouble for you, we'd like to stay in your guest house for one night." "Sirs, a monastic is already staying there." Those travelers approached Anuruddha. Now, as soon as the woman had seen Anuruddha, she had fallen in love with him. She now went to him and said, "Sir, you won't be comfortable surrounded by these people. Why don't I prepare a bed for you in the main house?" Anuruddha consented by remaining silent. After preparing a bed in the main house, she put on jewelry and perfume, and she went to Anuruddha and said, "You're attractive, sir, and so am I. Why did you take me as your wife?" But Anuruddha remained silent. She said the same thing a second time, but again no response, and a third time. She said, "You're attractive, and so am I. Why don't you take me and all this property?" Once again, Anuruddha remained silent. Then she threw off her wrap, and she walked back and forth, stood, sat down, and laid down in front of him. But Anuruddha controlled his senses and neither looked nor spoke to her. Then the woman said, "It's astonishing and amazing. Many people pay 100 or 1,000 coins to be with me, but this monastic doesn't want me and all this property, even when I beg him." Let's see. Okay, so then it goes to... So the Buddha rebukes him for this. So the final ruling: if a monk lies down in the same sleeping place as a woman, he commits the offense entailing confession. Now this gets interesting because different countries, different traditions will interpret this differently. Some people interpret this so strictly that they will not stay in a hotel. Monastics will not stay in a hotel because they think of it's under the same roof. And others think, well, this is really about the same room. It's not about you can't be in the same house or the same hotel. It's really like you should have a room. And there's another rule where, a monk is kind of raped and molested by this gang of women. And the Buddha says, "I allow you a door with a lock. So lock your door." Right? So if you have your own room with your own, with a locked door, then it's not an issue, really. But, you have to respect the different interpretations of this. I think that there's really, when you look at the Vinaya and you look at it, all the things in the Pali and everything, I don't think it going as far as the whole hotel is really accurate, but, this is just how things are. What do they do if they have to go to a hospital? Good question. If it's in a Buddhist country, well, they have whole wards with monks, right? So it's probably easier if it's a Buddhist country. You just go to the monk ward. So you don't have, and maybe the monk ward is in a special wing that's not under the same roof as women. I don't know. All right. So this one's a bit more, this is about like being in the same place, not necessarily like sleeping for the night. At one point, the Buddha was staying in Savatthi in Jeta's Grove. Venerable Udai was associating with and visiting a number of families in Savatthi. After robing up one morning, he took his bowl and robe and went to a certain family. Just then, a housewife was sitting in the door of the house while the daughter-in-law at the door to a guest house. Udai went up to this housewife and gave her a teaching, whispering in her ear. And the daughter-in-law thought, "Is this monastic my mother-in-law's lover? Or is he speaking indecently?" After teaching the housewife in this way, Udai, who this guy Udayi is responsible for a lot of rules being created. In the Bhikkhunis, there's Tulananda, who's also responsible for a lot of Bhikkhuni rules being created. But Udayi is he had some problems, but in the end he became awakened, so it worked out okay. So after teaching the housewife, Udayi went up to the daughter-in-law and gave her a teaching in this way. Is this monastic my daughter-in-law's lover, the housewife thought, or is he speaking indecently? When Udayi had left, the housewife said to her daughter-in-law, "Hey, what did this monastic say to you? He gave me a teaching." "But what did he say to you?" "He gave me a teaching too." And they complained and criticized him. "How could Venerable Udayi give teachings by whispering in the ear? Should not teachings be given audibly and openly?" The monks heard this and complained. The Buddha said, "What a stupid, foolish, useless person," etc. So first preliminary ruling, if a monk gives a teaching to a woman, he commits an offense entailing confession. So it starts off with, monks aren't teaching women, period. And then it goes to a second one, second sub-story. Soon after, some female lay followers saw some monks and asked, but the monks said no. And they said, "Please, just a couple sentences." And they said no. And so the Buddha said, "All right, I allow you to teach 5 or 6 sentences to a woman." And then second preliminary, if a monk gives a teaching of more than 5 or 6 sentences to a woman, he commits an offense entailing confession. But it keeps going. Monks of a group of 6, they taught women more than 6 sentences. How can monks? Final ruling: if a monk gives a teaching of more than 5 or 6 sentences to a woman, except in the presence of a man who understands, he commits an offense entailing confession. So this is why you'll often see, especially if you are a woman, a lay woman, you'll see that you could talk to a monk, but they'll usually have another monk with them, right? And then they could talk to you as long as it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. As long as somebody else is there, you can talk Dhamma, plenty. Actually, wait a second. This is not even another monk. It could be just a lay man too, in the presence of a man who understands. And a man who understands is a man who understands what if there's like some innuendo and sex stuff going on. That's what it means. All right. Yeah, that's the end of that grouping. Gregory, I don't think they were doing it as a group. I think they were maybe, splitting up and things like that. Who knows? But this is what I wanted to get to actually was the other group, because it explains what secret to the eye and secret to the ear means and things like that. Let's see. Here we go. I think this is it. Sitting in private. Yeah, here we go. All right. No, I don't believe so. Yeah, that's a good. Actually, it makes me want to go back to the rule to check it out. There are other rules about being in private, like being like with the woman, where there being another woman is fine. Like for instance, I only really allow to be in a car with my own kind of reading of the rules and my own policy is if at all possible, I want to, unless it's an absolute emergency, I want to avoid being alone in a car with a woman. Like if only one woman is driving. If there's two women, then it's okay. But if it's just myself and one woman in a car, there's just way too many things that can go wrong with that. It's just not good. If I was on a bus with 100 whatever women, that would probably still be kind of weird. I don't know that I want to do that, to be honest with you. But I don't know that it would technically break a rule, per se. That would be kind of weird. Kind of off. Let me share the screen here. Sitting in private. So this is something that both lay men should understand with bhikkhunis, and lay women should understand with bhikkhus. So this is something actually important to understand. So at one time when the Buddha was staying in Savatthi and Atapika in his monastery, Venerable Udayi, ex-wife, became a nun. She often went to see Udayi, and he often went to see her. And Udayi would sit in private alone with that nun. So Udayi and his ex-wife become monastics, and they're hanging out too much. The monks of few desires complained, how can Venerable Udayi sit in private alone with this nun? The Buddha called him a useless man. How can you do this? And a training rule was set forth. If a monk sits in private alone with a nun, he commits an offense entailing kapra. Now this is alone with a nun. There is alone with lay women as well. There's a different rule. But we're not going to go. It's basically the same. There's a few differences, but you don't have to worry about it too much. But so alone, just the monk and the nun, in private. These are the things important to understand. What does in private mean? In private means private to the eye and private to the ear. So what does private to the eye mean? One is unable to see them winking, raising an eyebrow, or nodding. What does private to the ear mean? One is unable to hear ordinary speech. And then they're sitting down. So like in these rules, if one is sitting and one is standing or something like that, then the rule breach is not there. But that's not too pertinent. But here's the non-offenses. If the monk is not seeking privacy, so like if it just kind of happens, then there's no rule breach. You know, like if it just accidentally happens, somebody leaves the room or whatever, then there's no rule breach. Now the monk shouldn't stay there. You know, I'll give you an example. Like when I was with Adharanya Bodhi with Ayatataloka and the bhikkhunis, if I was in a car, so like say myself and Ayatataloka, and if the bhikkhuni or the samaneri or whoever is doing the driving leaves the car, then I get out of the car. Right? So that Aya and myself are not in the car at the same time. Right? So there's these kind of, especially if you're driving around monastics or, you know, having trips with monastics, these are important things to kind of understand how they go. But private to the eye and private to the ear. This is very important. I'll give you a few examples. So Bhante Gunaratana and the monks at Bhavana during retreats, there would be interviews. And the interviews would be done in the library, close to the door. And you could walk by and you could see Bhante Ji or myself or somebody in the library, basically alone with the woman. Now, it's not private to the eye, because anybody walking by can just see right into the library because the door is glass. It's also not private to the ear, which if, you know, the lay person wants to be private is kind of a bit iffy, you know, because you can't really expect it, because there's slots up top. So if you just stood around, you could hear the people talking, right? So because it's not private to the eye and it's not private to the ear, it's not a rule breach. It's perfectly fine, even though there's a monk and a woman in a room together at the same time. So these are the kind of things that a layperson who's dealing with monastics, whether bhikkhus or bhikkhunis, should kind of understand. Jay gives an example of the from The Simpsons. Yeah, well, this is the thing. If you as a monk, both a bhikkhu and bhikkhuni, if you kind of are like, be very wary of even allowing something like that to happen for a second, then, wrong, false allegations and all kinds of things like that are not in play. So you don't have to worry about it. I've even heard like in like married men in corporations and things like now have like made rules like they try to not make sure that they're not alone with another woman employee or things like that. And I was like, oh yeah, hey, that's probably a good policy, right? So that there's no worries. Like the people, everybody will feel safe. There's nothing hidden, etc. Things like that. I wouldn't even care about keeping them from being abusive. Protecting yourself. If the monk is going to be inappropriate towards somebody, that's their problem. Especially if they're monastic, they should know how to be. Like there's if you've ever read Bhante Gunaratana's autobiography, he has an example, and this is in like the late 1960s, because so this is like the hippie free love era, right? And he's invited to teach, at a retreat at some place, and I think it was like Utah or Nevada or something. And he's brought to his little teacher cabin, and he walks in, and there's this naked woman lying right on his bed. And it's so cute. I've even heard him, like I asked him about this, and it's very cute because he's so sincere and honest. He's like, and he said, he's like, I didn't even have an ounce of attraction arose in me, but arose in me was as anger towards the disrespect for the Dhamma. I was like, that's so cute. So it's like, no, go away. This is not the kind of teacher I am. But like that's like, yeah. But most of the monastic teachers will have had at least one kind of experience like that. Bhikkhunis as well, by the way, not just bhikkhus. It's just kind of how things go. This is how human primates are. There are monastics who interpret the meaning the whole Dharma hall, like if the last man leaves after the public teaching, even if there's other people in adjacent rooms. The size doesn't really matter. I mean, if it's locked up and dark and nobody can see you inside it, and nobody can hear you, even if it's an auditorium, that's a breach of the rule. Secret to the eye, secret to the ear. That's the most important thing. So then you have, has a layperson been inappropriate with me? No, thankfully so far, no. Um, I've also made sure I don't put myself in any situation where that happens. So, like, I've stayed in people's houses before, but they're usually families I trust, or they're like, an old, an old retired couple with their kids are out. Like, like when I've been invited to teach in different states and things like that. Um, like, there's been things where like I was gonna stay in the house and there's only one woman there, and I said, no, that's not good. No, I'm not gonna do that. So like, I won't stay in a house when there's just one woman. No bueno. Um, if there's a family, if it's like a husband and a wife and kids or whatever, then that's okay, no problem. Because then there's other people. Do those rules apply when staying with your parents? Well, I don't have to worry about that anymore now that my mother's dead. But no, before that, I mean, both my parents were there anyway. Um, when I stay with my sister, my younger sister, she's married with the kids, so there's a whole family there. Um, when I stayed with my other sister, my nephew was there. So no, I've never actually, even with family, I've just never actually done that. Um, yeah. I'd have to be very, very, very trustworthy. Like, oh, I'll give an example. Even technically, this didn't break a rule, but this is an example of kind of things I'm wary about. So this was at Empty Cloud, when Empty Cloud, when it was just Buddhist Insights in New York City, and and I was leading a retreat, and I was at the end of the retreat. There's this very nice lady. She was about my age, and she was like cooking there. She was pretty good looking Latina lady and things like that. And, she was the cook there, and she really liked my teachings. And I was gonna go. I had to walk this 7 whatever blocks to the subway, and it was raining. I was like, I got an umbrella, no problem. She's like, no, Bante, I want to drive you. And I'm like, no, I don't really need it, and I don't want to do it, but she's so nice, and she's, I don't want to say no, because I felt, this was actually, I was a bit more, in my early days, I was like, I don't want to hurt people's feelings, and I don't want to feel like, like women, now I would never do this. I would say, no, no, no. But what I didn't know was she had like a little hot rod coupe. So here I am, a Buddhist monk, with this beautiful woman in this little hot rod coupe. And I'm like, okay, I am never doing this ever again. This is an example of this is not happening ever again. Still to this, nothing bad happened. She didn't do anything. It was just, she was a very nice lady. That's all. But I mean, I just imagine like imagine if like a Buddhist person saw this. I'm like, oh no, this would not be good. Like some random Thai person is like walking by and sees a Buddhist monk with it. It's like, oh no, this is not good. So yeah, so but this is one of those things. Like as a monk, you're learning to live the rules, and you make mistakes, and you're like, okay, that's a good example of why I'm never doing that ever again. Well, because most of my friends in life have been women, and I have sisters and things like that. I was very kind of cognizant of this kind of feeling of like I remember my early days at Bhavana when I was driving around Bante G and stuff like that. I remember one of the women residents was like, "Oh, I can never do that," and I felt really bad about that. Like, I mean, obviously, I could, as a layman, I couldn't drive around any of the ayahs. But you know, it still felt like I felt like I felt for that woman who was like, who would have loved to have like driven Bhante Gunaratana around or whatever to learn, you know, because when you drive a monk around, you know, they're basically a captive audience. Like you get asked them questions, do things like that, and I felt, you know, I kind of felt bad for that, and but you know what really kind of changed my mind? Me too. Me too was like, you know what? Somebody could make all kinds of allegations against me, and I would have no defense against it, and all these things. And like, I think these rules are in place for a good reason, and I should really maintain them. Um, so so yeah. Oh, Karuna, that's because you have Buddhism ingrained into you, right? Like the average Westerner would not, because it's not part of their normal culture. They would not think that way. They would not be. They would, because it's just so normal. You know. I remember when I did my bone marrow donation, and the morning of, well, I was in the hospital in DC, and they were going to do my blood work and everything, and I was on the table, and this Thai woman nurse walks in, and she looks mortified. Her eyes like bulge out, and she's like, what do I do? What do I do? And I had to explain to her, it's okay, by the monastic, this is for medicine, and you can do this, no problem. You do what you need to, you know, draw my blood, no problem. She's like, okay, okay. She felt okay after that, but she was like, you know, because she had been trained her whole life. You don't go anywhere near monks. You don't touch monks or anything like that. And then here's this monk on this table that she's supposed to touch and draw blood from. She was really like, her eyes just bulged out and like, whoa. You know. So a Western nurse is not going to think twice. Oh, it's just some weirdo in robes. I need to get his blood. It's not going. It's it's a very big difference, in terms of, you know, culture. It would be cool to see a monk version of Taxi Cab Confessions. I vaguely remember something like that, but I've been in the back of an Uber a couple of dozen times in the last couple of years. I've met lots of Uber drivers. Not taxis quite, but Ubers are like the modern day taxi. People are so antisocial these days. Like, I guess they just, you know, I saw something about people agitated that the Uber driver said hello or whatever. I'm like, I must be old. Because I'm like, if they talk to me the whole time, I'm fine. Like, hey, yeah, you know, how you doing? Blah blah blah. You know, most of the time they don't talk to me. One time there was this Latino guy, and he was kind of getting into meditation a little bit, and he's like, you know, he talked to me the whole time. That was fine. I enjoyed that. No problem. Uh, but most people are just like, you know, totally quiet. Even like when I'm on airplanes, when I'm traveling around, most people don't even say a word. Every once in a while, somebody will come up and say something and talk to me, but most people are just kind of like so wrapped up in their phones and antisocial these days. All right, I think this is a good time to end it. So All right, friends, Suki Hotu, may you be happy and at ease, practice well and be well. May you have a spiritually successful and peaceful practice until we meet again, which could be tomorrow morning for Morning Monastery Experience, every morning, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m., or maybe Saturday for Insight Timer session, Sunday on the Discord for Suttas Monday, or next Monday for another Dhammapalooza, if I'm alive then. Have a good week.